Go.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening and welcome to the PWI Glasgow Section meeting for March 2021. I'd like to welcome you all to this online webinar presentation and just give you a bit of a reminder about domestic arrangements tonight. The meeting will be recorded later during the presentation. It's not being recorded at the moment. All cameras will be off and you, the audience, will be muted during the presentation. Chance to speak later. Please raise any questions during the presentation or make comments on the dashboard. Questions pop up. So that's a little pop-up window that GoToWebinar give you, and you should find a little grey thing in there that says questions, a little white arrow. If you open that up, you can type questions and they'll be discussed with the presenter after the main presentation. Once we get to that stage and we've used all the written questions, we'll then open the mics for ad hoc stuff. So on to section news. Apologies for absence. Do we have any apologies, Jim?
Yes, indeed, Tom. We have apologies from John Oates.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Section news is later, AGM. But at the moment, just a reminder that with no change to our meetings, it will still be the third Wednesday of every month at 5:30. We'll continue with those until the restrictions get lifted. Our office, WSP's office in Glasgow, is open now, but only for those who have a medical reason for attending the office. That kind of rules me out. I'm quite happy working from home. So tonight's meeting kicks off with the section AGM, and the agenda for that on your screen. It says Chairman's Remarks, and I'm addressing you all as the Chairman and outgoing Chairman. I've been doing the chair for this Glasgow Section PWI since, I reckon, about 2015. We weren't quite sure of the date because for a while I was Vice Chairman to Jill Coleman and stood in whenever Jill had work commitments and couldn't make it. So sometimes I was Chairman but acting in a Vice capacity. I've really enjoyed, and I commend it to Greg. I'm sure if Greg is nominated as Chairman tonight, he will enjoy his time as Chairman. It's a very challenging thing, and it just reminds you that once a month on that third Wednesday of the month, you have to rise to the occasion and be ready to speak to the masses online. These days, everybody's so used to that now, we just do it all the time. I've been doing some global webinars where my global audience for the matinee session around about 11 o'clock in the day has been in the order of 180, and for the evening session at 11 o'clock at night, it's been in excess of 200 as I reach out to Asia Pacific and the Americas. So that global thing, the people in all parts of the world listening to me drone on for 2 hours about track, mainly. Anyway, enough about me. I hope you've enjoyed me being Chairman. I'll still be around as a member of the committee, and feel free to approach me with anything you like that is track related, and I'll do my best to answer it. I'll hand over to Jim now for the minutes of the previous AGM, or were they online, Jim?
Yes, the last AGM we held was on the 17th of April 2019. Our AGM last year didn't take place as a result of the imposition of COVID restrictions. The meeting was held on the 17th of April 2019 at Arcadis' offices at 180 West George Street, Glasgow. 14 members were present, along with 9 other visitors who had turned up for the later speaker. We had apologies from 4, Tom, yourself, John Oates, Phil Cave and Angus MacDonald. The meeting was chaired by the Section Vice Chairman Greg McMillan. The business of the meeting was the election of section officials for 2019-20, which turned, of course, into 2019 to 2021. The following were elected, all of whom were properly proposed and seconded. Chairman Tom Wilson, Vice Chairman Greg McMillan. Jack Scott, the then Section Secretary, advised that having held the post for a phenomenal 39 years, felt that the time was right for a younger member to take the section forward. Unfortunately, there were no nominations from the meeting for this to take place, and in the meantime, the very slightly younger Jim Watson, past Vice President for Scotland and committee member, agreed to act in the post of Secretary until a new Secretary could be found. The Section Committee for 2019-20 was agreed as Tom Wilson, Greg McMillan, Jim Watson, Jack Scott, John Oates, Chris Doig and Ryan Keyes. As an update to that, during the intervening 2 years, Ryan Walker and Angus McGregor both agreed to join the committee and assist in organising the section. There being no further business, the formal meeting was closed, and Greg then introduced Neil Fagan, the head of track engineering from HS2, who presented his paper, HS2, High Speed to the North. And that ends the minutes of the 2019 AGM.
Thanks, Jim. Okay, that leaves us to the appointment of section officials and committee for hopefully just the 1 year, 2021 to 2022. And the note there says Greg McMillan has agreed to be nominated as chairman, and Angus MacDonald has agreed to be nominated as section secretary. Have they been duly seconded, Jim?
Yes, they have.
Okay. Are there any questions that the audience would like to raise on their appointment? If so, please do so now. And I'll apologise to Angus McGregor because I've got Angus MacDonald in there instead of Angus McGregor. I'll fix that. The best laid plans, eh? Okay, note the section secretary, Angus McGregor, instead of Angus MacDonald. Could you note that, Jim? If I can do it interactively. Oh, here we go, look at this. Real-time update, there you go, you can't get any slicker than that. Hope for that, please. So sorry, Angus, you're not off the hook. Okay. So we don't have any questions about their appointment. Can I take it then they are duly appointed from next meeting onwards, Jack? Jim?
Yep, they're duly appointed from next meeting onward, or by agreement from, if you like, the summer recess.
Okay. We'll speak to each individual and see how they want to do the handover. Committee members. Who have we got for committee members apart from myself and yourself and the aforementioned? Have anybody left who was a committee member before?
The previous committee, well, you say yourself, myself, Greg, Jack Scott, John Oates, Chris Doig, Ryan Keyes, Ryan Walker, and of course Angus.
Okay. So we've got Jack Scott on the call tonight. Unless you send me a question, Jack, you're in again. And we'll approach the others just to confirm that they're happy to continue as a committee member. Some people on the call who are not familiar with the role as committee member said, what does a committee member do? They support the chairman and vice chairman. Normally when we're having meetings, that could be arranging the chairs around the table, things like that. And they also contribute to selection of presentations during the year. We like to provide a varied diet of technical papers from a variety of sources. We've had manufacturers, we've had private entities, we've had technical papers on network rails renewals works, and we've had people talking about industry standards and so on. So we like to have a varied say, and we welcome committee members' suggestions for what they would like to have a paper done on, and we can then approach the agreed individuals to see if they were prepared to come and deliver a paper. Our paper tonight is entitled Bridge over the River Dulnain and onwards to Grantown and Spey. Grand title. A bit about presenters, first of all. So Mike Tuch, first of all. Mike Tuch is a retired civil structural engineer who lives in Inverness, and he's been a volunteer in the Strathspey Railway since 1992. He spent most of that time on the permanent way and helped with the rebuilding and reopening of the Water Garden to Broomhill section of the track. Mike points out that he's not actually a permanent way engineer, but he simply picked up the basics over the years from the Strathspey Railway's permanent way engineer. Well, actually, there's a lot of people on the call are self-taught that way too. I don't ever remember going to school to be taught to be a permanent way engineer. Somebody just said, "This is how you do it, Tammy," and that would probably be George Patterson or Lackey Rogerson or some of the older, wiser grey heads in the Drone office at the time said, "This is how you do it," and you picked up and went along. With Mike's background in civil structural engineering, he inspects the SRC bridges and he keeps an eye on buildings, both new and old, in addition to undertaking track inspections. He's been a director of the Strathspey Railway Association, the Strathspey Railway Charitable Trust, also known as the Rails to Grantown Group, and he remains on the SRC board. Our co-presenter tonight, Ian Stanworth, is a principal acoustic consultant currently working with Jacobs, and he's worked in acoustics since 1996, specialising in the assessment of construction noise. I know all about construction noise, being blessed with tinnitus in both ears through standing too near the balance cleaner for too long. I think it was diagnosed as. Ian was introduced to the world of railways while he's still very young by his father Colin, who worked with British Railway Search for 26 years as a noise and vibration engineer, and he contributed to several publications on railway noise during his particular career. Ian's worked in the rail industry for 4 years for First Engineering as an acoustic specialist and was involved in the production of guidance for noise measurement from road rail vehicles and on-track plan. Ian's worked as a volunteer on preserved railways since he was 18, spending much of that time on permanent way. He's been a permanent way volunteer at the Strathspey Railway for 10 years, and he's been the chairman of the Strathspey Railway Association since 2014. I'll pass you over in a minute to the slideshow. Just allow me a moment or two to do that, and we'll begin the presentation.
Are we ready to go?
Yes, Ian, all yours.
Yeah. Okay, well, good evening, everybody. It's Mike Tuch speaking just now. I'm doing the first part of this presentation tonight. Some time ago, when Ian bent my arm to take part on it, had I known that Stephen Muirhead was going to be sitting in tonight, I might have deferred what I'm going to say to him, because Stephen's been at the railway a lot longer than I have. The Strathspey Railway, for those that haven't been to see it, which is disgraceful, is depicted on this little map running from Aviemore at the bottom left to, at the moment, Broomhill middle screen towards the right. And the ultimate aim is to go a little bit further to get to Grantown and Spey. The Strathspey Railway runs on what was the original Highland Main Line, which opened in 1863. It was known as the Inverness and Perth Junction Railway at the start, and became the Highland Railway, part of the Highland Railway Group in 1865, two years or so later. That part of the railway system in the north closed in 1965, sadly, and the Strathspey Railway kicked in a few years later, 1972, with assistance from the then Highlands and Islands Development Board, and were able to secure the more or less the complete track from Aviemore to Grantown and Spey, but unfortunately only the section from Aviemore to Botegarten in the middle was still intact with rails in place. The rest got lifted, which is a bit of a tragedy, and we have managed to relay the Botegarten to Broomhill section, and that opened in 2002. Aviemore to Botegarten started as a train service in 1978. The original light railway order, as obtained in 1978, extended beyond Broomhill station a little bit to where the River Dulnain joins the River Spey, just about 3/4 of a mile beyond Broomhill. And the track has been laid as far as the River Dulnain, and the River Dulnain is now crossed. A bridge was erected there 7 years ago. It's incredible how time has flown since then. It just seems like a few months ago that we were working on that particular project. Go to the next slide, Ian, please. The sort of larger scale map of the railways in the Inverness Aviemore area shows where the Strathspey Railway fits into the railways pre-beaching. Inverness got connected to Perth in 1863, and this was the Inverness and Perth Junction Railway, masterminded by a civil engineer by the name of Joseph Mitchell, whose skills in selecting a route for the railway and general design and planning we're benefiting from to this day. A railway had been built from Inverness eastwards to Nairn Forest and then on to Keith, and the Perth Junction Railway turned right at Forest, went over Aviemore, Grantown and Spey to Aviemore, and then onwards south to Perth. Sometime later, in the late 1890s, a more direct route was built from Aviemore to Inverness, which is the line that's in use today as the Highland Main Line. And but the two sections remained in use right up until the end. The sleeper trains went via Forres and Grantown and Spey, and but sadly the beaching cuts put an end to services between Aviemore and Forres in 1965, and so it's of note that the Strathspey Railway runs on what was a main line. It's not a branch line with tight curves. We've got long straights, gentle curves, and fairly gentle vertical alignments, and built on a very sound sand and gravel alluvium formation, with no real risk of landslides and problems of that ilk. The other little thing to spot in this drawing is the dotted line coming in from the east from Craigellachie through Cromdale to Nethy Bridge. This is the was Speyside line, which became part of the Great North of Scotland Railway from Aberdeen, and it is shown there as linking into the line between Grantown and Aviemore, but it didn't really do that. It ran double track from the divergence, as we call it, into Botegarten, which in Botegarten station was a junction with a turntable engine shed and for the Great North system. That's it. Next one, Ian. This is Botegarten back early 70s, I would reckon. Just in the middle of the screen, you can see the end of the track as taken over by the Strathspey Railway, and a squad busy tidying up and rearranging sidings and switches. The signal box there, still there. It's a busy signal box now, thanks to some extra track work and signal work that Ian will speak about in a few minutes. Okay, Ian. And here's an image of the very first train, spring 1978. A lovely sunny day in the Highlands. Botegarten station having been taken back to life. The footbridge you see there wasn't the original one. This was retrieved from Dalnaspittle, I think. It can be corrected in that one and re-erected at Boat. The locomotive is a Ivet 2M2, owned by the Carmelli Pilot Group, which spent a long time away from Spey. It's privately owned. It's now back and being restored. The boiler should be back in Aviemore fairly soon, and we look forward to this same locomotive pulling trains on the Strathspey. Next, Ian. Aviemore station is really the base of the railway. When the SRC started in the 70s, it wasn't possible to get into Aviemore mainline station. This would have been BR. We didn't see it possible to release platform 3, the one that the train's sitting in just now. However, 20 years later, in 1998, I think it was, as part of the station regeneration program that Railtrack, I think it was then, carried out, a deal was made and SRC got into Aviemore, and which helped a tremendous amount in terms of catching passengers, and this part of the setup and the buildings are leased from Network Rail and ScotRail. Over the fence are platforms 2 and platform 1, which are the loop and main line on the existing line to Inverness. The rail connection, which Strathspey uses all summer when visiting trains, the visit is just beyond the screen away to the left on an extension of platform 2. Next. An overhead view taken by, I think, a gentleman called John Gray, who came and comes to the railway and does photo charter business and releases some of these images for us for PR work. This is midway between Aviemore and Botegarten on track that's not changed a great deal since LMS days. I think 2 winters ago, we changed something like 200 sleepers in this section. It's all bullhead rail, timber sleepers from the 1930s. Some of the sleepers we reckon had been there since the mid-1930s. So it's open country, trees and heather, and wonderful views across to the Cairngorm Mountains. Next. Botegarten station is restored. The locomotive here is another Ivet 2M2 from the 1950s. It's an LMS design built by in BR days, owned by the Strathspey Railway. Next. Botegarten station, as apologies for the greenery and the 4 feet in this image. We don't have weeds in the railway like this anymore. The building's been beautifully preserved and is looked after by a volunteer who lives in the station house just at the end there. And a lovely spot on a summer's day. Next. The scenery between Botegarten and Broomhill is more open farmland and different landscape altogether, with the River Spey nearby all the way through from Boat to Broomhill. Next. Broomhill is a single platform wayside station. middle of nowhere really, and it was sadly heavily overgrown, and the original station building had long been taken down. A replica was built in the 1990s ahead of the reopening date in 2002. Next. This is a sort of view. What's happened here, Ian? This happened when I was doing a trial the other night. Okay, I'll be quick. The track between Botegarten and Broomhill was gleaned from different sources. A lot came from Kincardine Power Station, and Messrs Stirling, Dow and Muirhead, who are here tonight, I think were part of the squads that dismantled 60-foot flat bottom rail panels from Kincardine and arranged to get them up to Spey. It took a number of years to lay it all and get it all up to running standards, but we're quite proud of it, and it's flat bottom rail on timber sleepers. This image shows the little embankment in the mid distance that carried the Great North Speyside Railway from Nethy Bridge, and the next image should show how it used to be. It went wonky here with me, Ian.
Apologies, I'm not sure why it's doing that.
We won't labour it. The image I was going to show was one prior to closure of the double track sections before the Great North Line diverged off to the right towards Nethy Bridge. This is a view of our track prize length really between Aviemore and Boat, which was redone 10, 12 years ago. It's still the same rails. We took out the old timber sleepers, which prior to this sat on ash. There was no ballast. It was a very basic construction really, but it had served well and carried trains running at 60 miles an hour, I guess, for many years. We lifted the track, reballasted it, and renewed or put in concrete sleepers. Right, Ian? Yeah, that image was that failed to show was Permanent Way Squad working on track maintenance in the snow, just to show that we were out for all weather stuff. Broomhill Station has a passing loop built just beyond the north of the station to allow the service train locomotive to run round to the other end. And the line to the River Dulnain and onwards to Grantown heads off beyond the brake van and other van that's parked just some distance ahead of the locomotive. Next. As I mentioned earlier, we opened to Broomhill in 2002, and after a year or two of catching our breath, we started giving thought to carrying on. There are major difficulties getting between Broomhill and Grantown. One of them I'll talk about, the others, the one I'm going to talk about's been solved, the others Ian will cover in his part of the talk. We did it because we wanted to do it to show commitment and determination that Grantown was going to be achieved. We did it because we had in stock lots of pre-owned rail and sleeper components donated by Network Rail, for which we were very, very grateful. And we also had money to repair fences, improve drainage, and tidy up the formation and get it all ready for track. This was summer 2007. Next, Ian. Well, then a year later, we've got a lot of the track in. It's all concrete sleepers, flat bottom rails, and most of it is the fishtail clip. I think it's an SHC clip, which is a devil of a thing to get in. Once you know exactly where to hit it, they go in fairly easily. The away in the distance, just in front of that set of farm buildings, you can just about make out the masonry ornamental towers that are part of the River Dulnain crossing. Next, Ian. Now this will probably go wonky as well. We in 2005 and then again in 2007, we took delivery of many hundreds of what seemed perfectly good concrete sleepers that had been rejected from the West Coast main line, I think it was. There was lateral cracks in some of them below the rail position. And again, in 2007, we were very fortunate to take delivery of, I forget the numbers now, of complete 60-foot panels of flat bottom rail that were taken out in Drummochter. They came up and using these rails and concrete sleepers, that gave us all we needed to get the railway built out to the River Dulnain, and there are plenty left to go part of the way towards Grantown and Spey. Next, Ian, I think the next image will just about saw it. Okay, now here we are at the River Dulnain before the original Joseph Mitchell 1862-1863 bridge was taken away and scrapped. Terribly sad, really, but that's the way it is. In common with most bridge structures on the Inverness-Perth line from that date, amazingly ornate masonry was built to no great purpose other than to appease the local landowner. This bridge is near nothing. It's nobody lives nearby. There's nobody looks at it. It's pretty remote, yet it had this wonderful and intricate towers and turrets. So that went away, and we were faced with somehow finding the money and wherewithal to re-erect it in a modern fashion over a gap of 80 feet. Okay, Ian. We knew that whatever had to happen, it would have involved taking a bridge, a new one or a second-hand one, to site by rail and then lifting it onto the masonry abutments beyond. So we stopped the track about 3 panel lengths back from the bridge and left the erection of the bridge for another day. However, by this time, a solution had manifested itself. Next one, Ian. I'll talk briefly about this. In our exploratory works prior to re-erecting the bridge, we came across these amazingly intricate sort of roller bearings, which were part of the original Highland Railway Bridge, which had been left behind. All 4 bearing points had these complicated rollers and double plate arrangement, which must have been anticipating an awful lot of longitudinal movement when these were devised. Next. Right, and I think amongst the group tonight there's a certain Davy Dow, and he was, I'm pretty sure, instrumental in locating this bridge structure that you can see in the top left. I think the late Alan Stewart was involved, and possibly yourself, Stephen, as well. I went down with George McNair to have a look at said bridge, which is in Mary Street between Motherwell and Carthin. It was built in the early 60s as an access to owned it, had no need for it, and were prepared to offer it to the Strathspey Railway if we could use it, provided the Strathspey Railway took it down and transported it up to Inverness. I went down there with no real set impression what I was going to find, but as we looked at it and measured it and checked out what we could by looking into the hidden cavities at the bearing points, it seemed to be in tremendous condition. A report was done, presented to the Strathspey Railway Board, which I wasn't on at the time, saying, yeah, the bridge could be used. It was a twin road bridge, as you can see in the bottom image. All that we needed was the two side girders and one set of deck beams. We came to the view on the day of the visit that re-erecting it with a complete solid deck structure was never going to be possible. We would plan to re-erect it as a way-beam bridge with the two side girders and one set of cross beams, and then a longitudinal bearing beam under each rail. The other challenge was we had the bridge, as you can see, is skewed. The bridge over the River Dulnain was skewed the other way, which, but fortunately, with the angle of the skew and the position of the the vertical stiffeners and brackets for the cross beams, it was possible to slide one side beam relative to the other, and we got a near perfect match. So next one, Ian. This is just a general view of Gravenstraig Steelworks as was long ago. Not too sure of the geography here, but I think Mary Street's up to the top left of that image, and the rails that came in from the bridge in question, how they reached the steelworks, I'm not too sure on. Next. A wonderful image that Stephen Muirhead found for us of the bridge structure going up early 60s. Pretty rudimentary traffic management and not a safety hat or high visibility vest to be seen. The next one should be an image of it coming down. I don't know if something's gone wrong with the technology there, but
apologies.
After a period,
ran fine when I tried it the other night.
No, I did that with me one night, Ian, but I just thought it would be okay in the night. We go back to the one with and it'll just flash on very quickly. Yeah, after a period of deliberation, the Railway Board, I wasn't involved in this, but a contractor local to the site was engaged, who dismantled the bridge in summer 2008, I think it was, about almost a year after we surveyed it. And okay, Ian. It was taken to a yard, broken up, and the components we needed were taken by rail from Moss End up to next one, all the way to Inverness, and then stuck on the front end of a southbound train and thence to Aviemore. And from there we pulled it to Botegarten and set it into store until we could get round to modifying it, painting it, and hopefully then erecting it. Okay. There was a lull for a few years, and the Rails to Grantown group sort of evolved from the main company board, and various things happened. Not an awful lot happened in the field, to be honest. Money was the main consideration. The Rails to Grantown group got themselves a new chairman, a non-railway person, but who has left the organisation now. But what he did seem to have great skill in was getting money out of different people and wheeling and dealing. And he, his name was David Fraser. He, with support from the Cairngorm National Park, Highlands Islands Enterprise, and some persuasion, got the bridge girders modified to the design I did, painted. Next one, Ian. It's not working. And we cut up the deck components into individual cross beams to sit between the two cross girders. This was all done in late 2012 into 2013. We still had no clear sort of ability to erect the bridge. Cash was the problem. We felt the right way to do it was a crane like such as this, but the costs were way beyond our affordability limits. And I remember an impromptu meeting in the lodge at the Strathspey Railway, and I think Stephen may well have been there, and David Fraser certainly was. We got chatting that this bridge, as erected on the North Yorkshire Moors Railway a year or two previous, had been done at very favourable rates by Volker Rail, and perhaps similar could happen in the Strathspey. And to David Fraser's credit, he got the names and addresses of all the firms in the UK who had a gyro crane with the ability to drop our bridge into place, and he went away to undertake to speak to them. Next. I think that meeting might have been late summer, early autumn 2013. I never really thought much more of it until one day David phoned me up and said, Colas can erect the bridge and they're coming to do it on the 13th and 14th of February. I says, next year or the year after that, David, because whilst we had track out to the River Dulnain, it was far from complete. Lots of fittings weren't there, joints were fly fished one bolt instead of four, and a gap right up to the bridge had still to be installed. However, next we deferred all permanent way work elsewhere in the railway that winter and set down to getting the track up to scratch for Colas to come, and managed it with a fairly open winter. I think you were there by then, Ian, and I don't remember many weekends we didn't get working.
No, I think we worked every weekend.
The weather was okay. Colas sent their supervisor up. We ran him from Aviemore right through, checked all the overbridges and things, and was very satisfied with the track that the crane had to run on to get out to the river. And up it came 12th of February 2014. Next. Strathspey's own Class 27 pulled the Colas setup through from Aviemore the day before on the 13th. Okay. Next. Here it is, just north of Broomhill Station. The bridge to be erected is on the left of this image. The crane, as you can see, is pointing the wrong way, so we do a swing round, and that's another double image that's gone wonky. The two girders had been got ready, and they were taken through a few days before. Next. Part in an engineer siding that we had the foresight to build just short of the bridge, and the crane was an absolute wonderful piece of kit. It was just effortless. Next, Ian. 15 tons, was just nothing to it. It ran along beautifully. Next. Oh yeah, there was lots of spectators that day, including a BBC outside broadcast unit. That this thing made the BBC News that night, and there was also somebody flying around taking drone camera images, which is the first I'd seen of these little things. Next. This is the upstream girder going in, and the downstream girder, which probably won't show. Did briefly. We knew everything would be a tight fit, but it fitted as was expected. Okay. Next. So by lunchtime, the two girders were in, no hitches. We had our lunch, happy and contented. The Spey people there are the ones with the dirty high visibility vest. The fella with the yellow hat is David Fraser, who was, I suppose, as pleased as any of us. And the chap next to him was Jock Hay of Colas, who was, a wonderful guy, very, very good to work with. Okay. The rest, I think the crane worked that afternoon until it was dark, getting in the cross beams and doing as much as we could before it went back south. Right. No, that one didn't stay. Okay. I wasn't there the day after the erection, but as far as I remember, the crane was finished with by lunchtime. It was everything was gathered together. We pulled Colas, set up through to Aviemore, and the crane went away south on the 15th. And then later on that year, we decked out the bridge. There was a channel way beam underneath each rail and a timber beam set into that, and the rails are screwed down onto the same, and the deck is closed off in timber. Next. A couple of years ago, we had to get a steam engine onto it for photographic purposes. This is Cully 828, the Caledonian Railway loco that resides at the Strathspey Railway. It's owned by what are known as the Cully 828 Trust now. And I think it's the only steamer that's sat on the bridge. Next. And since then, we've done some fettling up. I think the pegs that you can see there are Chris Doig's handiwork. The new bridge deck construction is a lot beefier than the old Highland Railway one was, and the railhead level is somewhat higher than it used to be back in BR days. So there's a bit of bunking up with ballast to get everything to the right level. Okay. And there is the bridge as was last summer, desperately waiting for trains to come trundling along from Broomhill, over it and onwards towards where I'm sitting, towards Grantown and Spey. And I think that's the last of my images, Ian.
I think it is. Thanks, Mike. First of all, apologies everyone for the faults with the PowerPoint. I transferred it from one laptop to another, and in the process, something clearly happened. The big question now is, what's next? Well, the simple answer is, we've not exactly rested on our laurels. There's been an awful lot of paperwork required to try and extend the railway beyond the Dulnain Bridge to Grantown. But we didn't necessarily do things the easy way. The easy way would have been to extend to Grantown West Station, the former Highland Railway Station. But that's not necessarily convenient for Grantown itself. And as part of the process, we consulted heavily with residents in Grantown, and the decision was made that actually a station closer to Grantown itself would be preferable. So Our TORS order, which the TORS unit in the Scottish Government has seen in draft in 2019 and is expected to be finally submitted in its final form this year, includes that, with the possibility that we will pause for breath at the former Grantown West site. So what have we been doing since 2014? Well, quite a lot. That Mike referred to is Bodegarton Great North locomotive shed. And in the images that we showed of the beams being prepared for use, that's in that yard. We had a engineering facility in there for on-track plant, vehicles, that sort of thing. But unfortunately, again in 2019, I think it was, we had a rather catastrophic fire, which burnt that facility down and destroyed some of the track maintenance equipment that was in it. That was, however, an opportunity, and we took the opportunity to build back better. So we have a much larger, well, a slightly larger shed, but in line with the requirements, with the proposals in the original planning application, it's now rail connected. It wasn't previously. And that track was put in very much by a very small group of staff, helped, it has to be said, by the Signal and Telegraph team. They've done a fantastic job and have nearly completed their works in that area. The rate of work on that connection was actually incredible. And that's the connection into the main line. There is talk of some additional track work in the yard, but that's not yet confirmed. But that connection is in use. The signalling is yet to be complete, but works trains go in and out of there relatively frequently now. As well as that, work for this year and next year, certainly in terms of Permanent Way, will be an additional shed at Aviemore. We are blessed with the original Aviemore engine shed, which is a fantastic facility, 4-road, with its original engineering block on the back and its original office to the side, but a history of lighting engines up in there has resulted in perhaps what we might call premature aging in parts of the reef structure. And the engineering committee took the decision that they would quite like a running shed to permit the main locomotive shed to be turned over to pure engineering, the rebuild and maintenance of locomotives, be they steam or diesel, which are not in steam. And this appears to be an odd image, but bear with me. That's actually the Heinel locomotive shed at Dingwall before it was demolished. And this shed is actually the basis for the design for a shed that goes in that top corner, the top right-hand corner of Aviemore Yard. You can see that we have the 4-road engine shed that's still there, and adjacent to it, our carriage maintenance facility. And that is what it's proposed to look like. The Permanent Way works are due to start imminently. We have done some of the demolition works and much of the material has been transported down to site. So I think over the spring and summer, we can look forward to some hard labour laying in the new alignment. The big question is, though, are we going to get to Grantown? I think the general feeling is, well, yes, we'd very much like to, but there is a very big but, of course. There's always been a long-running desire for the Strathspey to go from a place to a destination. And of course, much as Broomhill is a lovely spot, it can be a bit windy. As Mike has made clear, it's kind of in the middle of nowhere. The nearest village, which is Nethy Bridge, is about 1.5 miles away. The Railsa Grantown team has been has taken several forms over the years, but it was reconstituted late 2017, 2018, I think it was, and in a relatively short period of time, a draft tours order was submitted to Transport Scotland in 2019, and consultation was held with the local public in Grantown, and that was late summer. Comments came back, as they always do, and unfortunately, because the environmental statement had taken quite a long period to action, it was felt by the National Park, amongst others, that the ecological survey work that was in that draft was now out of date. So we had to go and do it again, which is several £1,000s. The final submission is expected to be this year. So what happens next? The intended scope is to provide powers to build and operate a railway between Broomhill and the new station in Grantown-on-Spey. But that also includes alterations to the A95 trunk road at Gaich, and the rail underbridge associated with it. The associated infrastructure to do that, there is a fairly significant earthwork to incorporate, and also the necessary land compulsory purchases for road, because this is a joint tours order for the road and the rail works, that in order for us to get agreement, we've had to create. That's it was as a result of early agreements between Transport Scotland and the SRCT that would occur under a memorandum of understanding. The design work for the bridge was done by Transport Scotland, actually by Jacobs, and that's been incorporated into the document. So the required content is the documentation, the supporting memorandum of understanding between Railsa Grantown and Transport Scotland about the powers for who does what effectively, a funding plan, as well as supporting drawings and surveys, and you know, amongst others, Chris has been very helpful in some of the survey work. Our current status is we've received 4 statutory and 2 additional consultee comments. Grantown-on-Spey community engagement was almost overwhelmingly positive. So the scope was for nearly 5 kilometres of new railway track and a station at Grantown-on-Spey. The alterations to the A95 and its associated rail underbridge, and the memorandum of understanding, which was not legally binding, but that may be required as we progress, as we hope, towards construction. We were to undertake the sign-off for the tours order, contribute a very large sum of money to the underbridge, design, fund and construct a farm access and reinstate the railway and the station in Grantown-on-Spey, which, as you can appreciate, will be quite a lot of money. Transport Scotland will undertake, if the tours is signed off and there is a road construction budget allocation, to build the A95 works and the underbridge. The problem with that, of course, is how long will it take them to sort the budget allocation. So what's involved? Well, the difficult bit is this. This is the realignment of the A95 off its current route. Now there have been concerns over its existing route for a while, and there was concern specifically in terms of accident statistics, because it's a fairly blind curve with a reasonable change in gradient. So that shows the current A95, which is a strange alignment, the proposed A95 in red, and the reinstated railway line, including the earthwork, which goes to two-thirds to the right of the image. Beyond that, the earthworks are still in place. It's colloquially known as the bridge to nowhere, because the abutments and wing walls are still there, but the earthwork has been taken away. That is the current road, and that's just off the Glengynock corner. And the traffic management is in place because that's done some while ago when the GI works were being undertaken to influence the design for the new road alignment. That's the other end of the job, which just looks like a field. The rising ground in the background is actually the old rail alignment rising towards Darver Moor. This is the chosen site for the station, and will involve us dropping off the alignment through new earthwork and into the station site, which it is felt will be more than big enough for our purposes. And that is an outline of the proposed station site. It's opposite a caravan park, so it's felt it's a good location in terms of footfall, but also in terms of access. And that is architectural drawings produced by the former finance director of the Spey Railway Association, who prior to his retirement was an architect. The feeling of the buildings is very, very similar to those at Abbey Moor, albeit in a different orientation. So, how much? It's a big number. It's a very big number for the total project cost. We think the Scottish Government element of it is about 5 million. Railsa Grantown need to find 2 million. Railsa Grantown also need to find 2 million for funding for the station and the track, although obviously some of that will be in kind because of volunteer effort. And that in kind is thought to be upwards of £1 million. Now this was produced a few years ago. I have updated the date. We don't believe that we will be likely to see significant work, depending on funding, before 2025. And of course, the TORS, the Scottish Government approval is uncertain without the £2 million contribution. But without an approved TORS order, how can we raise the money? So we are in a bit of a cleft stick there, and a catch-22 situation. There was a meeting held in 2018 with Fergus Ewing to try and unlock this, and the formal Transport Scotland response is the Scottish Minister's concern to establish that a scheme is reasonably capable of attracting the funds required to implement it. That sounds to me as though there may be some flexibility, shall we say, in how funding may come to us. In terms of obstacles, well, finance, land ownership, the problem, whilst Mike noted that we were fortunate enough to gain the land ownership at the very beginning of the Spey from Aviemore to Grantown on Spey. Unfortunately, due to usage, an amount of the land has seeped into a different ownership. However, the ownership issues in terms of access to them are largely resolved, and we believe that the figures involved in terms of annual costs for access to those are fairly minimal. Obviously, Railsa Grantown would prefer to hand over a project which doesn't have annual running costs other than track maintenance and the running of trains and the obvious ones relating to structures. We try to minimize the finance costs wherever possible. That's going to be the big one. And it's the big one for most heritage railways, manpower. Whether we like it or not, unless you are a big railway near a large centre of population, volunteer manpower is always going to be an issue, as is the demographic structure of that manpower. Predominantly, our permanent way team, for example, are retired gents. I think the youngest frequent members of the permanent way team at the moment are 52. The oldest is 83. So it's a fairly grey demographic, shall we say. Please excuse if you find this image inappropriate, but we've always considered some form of a start to be the flag in the ground, as you see for the planting of the US flag on Iwo Jima. Ours is not quite as grand, but we now have established a site compound in Grantown, and hopefully we can start work on the land we do own there in terms of clearance, tree felling in the months to come, once we've obviously had ecological clearance that we haven't got birds' nests and the like. And that is a view looking west down towards the rest of the railway, a couple of kilometres away, well, 3 kilometres away. It's the physical presence, and that is the end of the presentation. And I'm sure Mike and I would welcome questions.
Thanks very much, Ian and Mike. Look, it's an excellent presentation about how to the problems involved in the preserved railway world and how to carry on. If anyone has questions they would like to type in the questions part of the GoToWebinar, please do so now. And in the meantime, I get to ask my own questions and make some observations. So the first observation I had was that the local 46464 in one of the earliest photographs had the shiniest buffers I've ever seen in a local. they were like mirror finished, and I was really impressed with that. Question though about track drainage, and it's a PWI engineer's nightmare sometimes. Are the older drain systems on the site suffering from any capacity, or are there problems with blockages? Are they bearing up well?
Well, I can do that one. The subsoil is very free draining. The Broomhill to Boatgarten to Broomhill bit, I remember in some of my early days as a volunteer there back, I don't know, mid early 1990s, helping to rod old clay drains, and I thought this is just a complete waste of time. We should be digging them out and putting in modern perforated plastic things and filter stone. So a lot of side drains between Boat and Broomhill were replaced. Some were replaced just recently, and other sections do need a bit of work. But you know, there's no terribly deep cuttings. There's not any major runoff from surrounding land because of the free draining subsoil. And by and large, the drains as have been there since 1863 are still functioning, albeit some have been replaced with modern plastic in preference to the old clay open tile drains. We attend to below railway culverts every winter. Just the other day we had a brickie in reinstating some displaced granite blocks at the end of one of these, and in tandem with clearing vegetation, we dug out quite a number of choked up below railway culvert inlet head wall sections. So it's just routine maintenance really, and if we keep doing that, it should stay as it is for long enough.
Excellent answer. Thank you very much, Mike. Another couple of observations from here. I don't know if you can go to the slide very easily, Ian. The one you had on the best kept length, in my observation, was that's an excellent picture of how it should be done, how it used to be done. Best kept length there, where you know you've got level beds, well-defined shoulders, and a clear safe path for people to walk safely from A to B. The other observation I had was. And the other image in the same in the winter. Yeah, okay. My other observation was you mentioned the SHC clips on F19 concrete sleepers. In my opinion, these were the best concrete sleeper ever invented, and I regretted their demise when there was plenty of them on the southern west coast, down at Lockerbie Carlisle end of the west coast when I was in the maintenance team there. And seeing the local boys tackle SHC clips as a two-man job with a heel bar and a chisel bar, it was, stand back and let them at it and watch you don't get struck with one. Entirely safe, they knew what they were doing, and they could rip out those type of clips quicker than you could take out panel clips. I love the F19s. A question about your bridge way beams on the structure. Did you mention, and I might have missed it, if they were hardwood, and were they new or were they second-hand?
The structural part of the way beam is a steel channel up with toes up. The cross beams and the bridge, Mary Street Bridge, are at metre centre, so we're not carrying not a big span really. The timber that sits into the channel is new redwood, Douglas fir, which in its own would have spanned the gap, so it's double strong. There's a steel channel section underneath that, and timber onto that. So it's steel does the work in its own.
The supplementary question was gauge control, and is gauge control maintained by the channel spacing, or do you have tie bars?
The steel channels are attached with brackets to the cross beams below, which doesn't show up in that image, but it's a steel to steel fixing that maintains the gauge, and the timbers are a tight fix to the into the steel channel.
Okay.
And having got the steel and timber assembly together, we then I forget what type of base plate that is. It's a sort of a dumpy sort of plate.
Look like M6.
With bundle clips. Yeah, that's right.
Possibly. Not the pan WBM, because WBMs have got inclined shear screws, which are tricky to fit unless you know what you're doing.
Yeah.
Last observation question for me then, before we go to questions from the audience. Observation first, the strange S&C combo at your new shed appeared to be a turnout and a set of traps combined in there.
Are you going to do that one, Ian?
I'll do my best. Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
That is the that's down to the PWI brain of our outdoor work superintendent.
Absolutely fantastic. I've never seen that combination before, but I can understand how it works and what's not to like about it.
Can I jump in here, Tom, and say,
Yep.
yeah, I think that's an absolutely great combination, a very unusual one. I think the only place I've seen something like that out in the big railway was Hillside Maltings. But yeah, absolutely great. It makes the layout so compact, and a big thumbs up to Georgie McNair for that one.
Yeah.
I think
the problem being that the site was so compact.
I think Rob Law, who is Stephen's right-hand man on S&T matters, was party to that arrangement as well. It's
Yes.
Very much so.
Just shows you what you can do with a rail saw and a Jim Crow. My last question then is about your new platform, and maybe a tongue-in-cheek question. Have you considered if the new platform would be a polystyrene one?
There's an interesting thought.
we have a previous presentation by featuring polystyrene platforms, and they appear to have a lot going for them in terms of construction depth. That's kind of like 2-inch scrape and blend off with sand. Place a big polystyrene block, stick a copper on the top, and walk away. Very quick to construct. Road rail machine only required. I just, I can give you some information on that if you wish, and there's some information on the PWI website if you want to.
I think that might be interesting. I think that might be interesting. In terms of the new Grantown station.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
I don't think we've got that far down the route.
Yeah. Just come the day, and I'm sure you'll get there.
Yes,
a question, observation first from Steve Muirhead, and just to point out, the black and white photos of the original Mary Street Bridge construction were courtesy of Never Rail. And Andrew Anderson asks, it's very interesting to see roller bearings from the original structure. Can you tell us what bearings were provided for the new bridge?
Yeah, I'll do that one. We made use of the bearings that came up from Mary Street. One end was a basic sort of simple rocker bearing sitting into a cast steel shoe on one end, and the other end was a sliding bearing, a downstand underneath the plate girder, again a cast steel shoe that allowed for longitudinal movement. We cleaned them up and put grease in there. Have I gone mute?
No,
don't think I have.
No, you're okay.
No, okay. Something flashed on the screen. The beauty of doing it as a sort of open way beam structure is we can still get into the bearings to have a look at them from time to time. So it's we reused the bearings as installed in 1962 and sat them on top of these iron roller bearing pieces of metal work that we found. The abutment walls we checked, they're solid granite, about 2 meters wide or 2 meters long. It's a wonderfully well built piece of masonry.
It looks like something from the Aztec era. Close jointed blocks. Mark Taylor asks, a bit tongue-in-cheek, can he have the REPW drawing number for that arrangement? And I'm thinking, Mark, you should know better. That piece of kit obviously predates the REPW drawing series, and the answer is no. Gavin Yates asks, what issues do you anticipate with the steep gradient from the valley floor up to Grantown?
All right.
Well, we don't start at the valley floor, I think is the simple answer. From the Dulnain Bridge east, or northeast, I suppose, we're already on embankment. There is some talk of actually making some of the earthworks slightly steeper as we head in towards the old Grantown West station. But we bear in mind the rest will largely be at the original gradient profile. We don't envisage any problems at all.
Yeah, it was. I think it's 180, Ian, from what I remember of it.
That's correct.
That's nothing. That's the last question I have typed up from the floor. I'm going to open the mics now, and if anybody wishes to pose a question, could you please raise your hand, and I'll hopefully point to your name and you can speak. Let me try and unmute everybody first of all. So you may find yourself double muted. So I have unmuted, I think, all attendees. I had this trouble the last time though. So let's have a show of hand first. Let's see how I can do. Unmute. Russell, could you do me a favour and see if you can unmute yourself?
Can you hear me okay, Tom?
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just checking that the system was working okay. So, again, questions from the audience. Anybody can pipe up, unmute yourself and ask away. Okay, that was a resounding silence there. So, that being the case, I will ask Greg McMillan if he can unmute himself. So you've done that, Greg, and propose the vote of thanks on behalf of members. Thank you. Try again, Greg. Good. Looking promising. Okay. Craig, if you're trying to unmute yourself, I can see you as being unmuted.
Hello.
I can. Yes, yes. I love it when it works. Thank you.
Sorry, I had some Wi-Fi issues there, so hopefully you can hear me okay.
Can do.
I dropped out a bit there, Tom. Are you looking for me to do the vote of thanks now, or?
Yes, please, if you wouldn't mind, Craig.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so thanks, Tom. So Ian and Mike, a really great presentation there. Thanks for that. It's a topic I know is close to the hearts of many of the PWI members, as many of them have been involved in Spey Railway over the years. It actually reminded me of one of my very first bosses when I joined the railway, and that was Matt Innes, who spent almost every weekend, I think, working on Spey Railway. So it's really great to hear that the history of the line and the changes that took place to the rail network in that part of the world as a result of the beaching cuts. You had some cracking photographs from the early days right up to recent times. Really stunning scenic views in there as well, especially the Perth Junction Railway Bridge. That looked amazing, and it reminded me of Och Viaduct at Blair Athol, which is also very ornate. And as you said, Mike, they're mainly built that way to appease the landowners at the time. It's a line I've never visited personally, and it's definitely on my list when we're allowed to.
Hooray, well done.
So yeah, so I was quite surprised to see how good the track looked as well, that Tom commented on. So given that it's run by volunteers and it has bullhead rail from the 1930s. It's quite incredible, really. To see that cess that you could run a bike along. So all credit to yourself and the others that have put in the hard work to get it to that standard. It was also funny to hear your positivity about the SHC clips, as they're generally completely cursed when they're discovered on any other running lines on the network. But that was pretty good. One thing that struck me as well was I hope it's all recorded somewhere where all the materials came from. For example, you mentioned the bridge from Motherwell, the panels that came from Drumoctor, another structure from Moss End, etc. So I think it's important that that information is kept somewhere in the future so that we can trace back where all that infrastructure came from. Another observation from me was that, as a hot topic in the railway design these days is all about sustainability. And I think Strathspey Railway is a great example of that, with the amount of materials that have been reused and that have stood the test of time as well. On the other side of that, it was great to see modern pieces of kit such as the Kirov crane being used there, and again, really great photographs of that to record the reconstruction of the bridge. I think, the modern railway is really bound by standards and health and safety, etc., and quite rightly so, but it was just quite refreshing to see people getting on with just building a railway. And, I have to be careful what I say there, but I guess I'm just trying to say, when you strip away a lot of the red tape, the building railways is quite a straightforward process, and Strathspey Railways is a great reminder of that. Good also for me to see it gave us an insight into the forthcoming work, such as the new shed at Aviemore and the aspirations to continue the line on to Grantown. So looks like some interesting challenges to get there with the new underbridge, and it's approximately 4.5 kilometres of new railway, I think. So I sincerely hope you get there, and I noted your obstacle in regards to the demographic for volunteers. So hopefully once lockdown is over, there may be some more people willing to get involved with that as well. I could go on and on, but I think I'll finish up there, and I'll just say, on behalf of the members of Glasgow Section, thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Tom, I'll just hand back to yourself if you're there.
Thank you. Just a reminder of the upcoming section meetings. Edinburgh Section PWI is having a webinar on Wednesday the 7th of April entitled Track Design the Basics by E. Oh, there's a surprise. Don't expect too much, track designer guys, but we'll take it from the width of a horse's backside, engage, and take it up to modern day. Just the basics. So, our next Glasgow Section PWI, Wednesday of the month, Wednesday 21st of April, will be a webinar by Chris Conroy from the RSA, Arcadis, part of the RSA, the Alliance. And now, at the time, 1903, I would normally open the mics and do networking reception. I can do that for 5 minutes if anybody wants to ask supplementary questions. I'll stop recording the session and then hopefully you're able to speak.
Ian and Mike, Jim Watson, I'd very much like to thank you for the presentation you've given tonight. Your photograph of the prize length, absolutely wonderful. That's exactly what I would expect to see of a bit of P-Way. What did really hit me hard was when you said it was 2002 that you opened up from Boat of Garton to Broomhill. I well remember an extremely wet Sunday.
Muted.
Guys.
Unmuted.
Sorry, Jim, I might have cut you off in the middle of your recollection there, inadvertently.
Right, okay. Do you want me to start again, or
I got to the extremely wet Sunday, and I was
Oh,
waiting to see how
Extremely
you're
Wet
going to die
Sunday.
out.
Yes, back in 2002. I'm just shocked that that was 19 years ago. I didn't think it was anything like that. I walked the line along with my son as part of an independent inspection for reopening or opening to Broomhill, and a raising of the axle loading. And the PWI was good then, and from what you've shown us tonight, it's a lot better now.